book that she's written, Sand Queen, are extraordinary, and I think the best way to introduce her is to read from a couple of these reviews. Every war eventually yields work of art which transcends politics and history and illuminate our shared humanity. Helen Benedict's brilliant new novel has done just that with this century's American war in Iraq. Sand Queen is an important book by one of our finest authors, Robert Olin Butler, author of A Good Scent from a Strange Mountain. I want to read one more and then say something. Helen Benedict's compelling story provides an intimate picture of what it means to be a soldier, what it's like to live on the battlefield, and what the ethical choices are that our troops have had to make in Iraq. At times funny, at times grimly painful, Sand Queen offers a new chapter in contemporary American history, which tells you it's a really good read. My favorite review of this book, because I've been, as Helen's longtime friend, as well as colleague at Columbia. By the way, my name is Mary Marshall Clark. Hello, I forgot that part. I've been watching her reviews, looking them up every night to see what new reviews she's gotten. And my favorite one was somebody who said, this woman is seriously pissed off about the war in Iraq. And I know that to be true. Helen is a real activist and scholar, and she's a warm and wonderful teacher. She's an extraordinary human being, and the origins of this book began a few years ago when Helen was doing interviews, which we were fortunate enough to be able to transcribe in the Center for Oral History for this book called The Lonely Soldier, The Private War of Women Serving in Iraq. And so that became her nonfiction book, and along the way, having coffee or whenever, Helen said, I'm going to also do a novel because I want to represent the other perspective as well. So Helen is a journalism professor here, a tenured journalism professor, and one of our finest scholars and writers at the university.
Well, wow. Thank you. That was really sweet. Thanks a lot. Well, most people have already been in the room with me for a while, so
okay. I'm going to sit over here.
It's going to be a little rough not to repeat myself, so I'll try not to, but I will have to some extent, so forgive me. But keep thinking of questions, because my favorite thing to do is just to talk to you all. So actually, if you don't mind, I would like to ask the new people who came in the room who they are and what they're working on. Yeah. If so, could I start with you?
My name is Santiago Wills. I'm a graduate student in journalism school.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Hello. I'm not teaching this semester, which is why you don't know me yet, but perhaps next semester.
I'm from Bogota, Colombia, studying philosophy, and I'm very interested in literature.
Oh, good. Oh, welcome.
I'm Alison Janisco. I'm also a student at the Graduate School of Journalism.
Oh, you are?
Mm-hmm. I'm from Oxford, Connecticut, and just graduated from Providence College with a degree in English and psychology. And I'm really interested in what you've been doing.
Did Dale send out any? Okay.
I'm Eddie Kisura. I'm actually a student at the New School in Creative Writing.
Oh, okay.
I went to Columbia a few years ago, so I've heard about the talk. That's why I come in.
Okay, good, good. And who else have we not spoken to? No, I think I know everyone around the table already, right? And then back here, yeah.
I'm Alessandra Nishida. I'm an instant writer, and I'm working on writing a paper called Questioning the Truth about a choreographer just being interviewing people that only want to truth.
Right.
Hi, I'm Ellen Weiss, and I'm actually a branding and innovation expert. And I'm here because I'm interested in the Oral History Masters of Arts program.
Huh. I have a friend called Ellen Weiss, but she's not you.
Wonderful. The woman who is at NPR?
No. So there are three of you.
Because at the end of All Things Considered, or
yeah.
a very well-known producer.
Yes.
Not me.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, I think I've met everyone else. So, all right. Well, because this is a novel, I'm going to do what novelists always do, which I'm going to start by reading, and then I'll talk more about how I did what I did and try and say some things I haven't already said in the last hour. But I'm going to read a part you haven't heard yet, those of you who were here before. But just as Mary Marshall Clark mentioned, I spent about 3 years talking to soldiers, women soldiers mostly, who'd served in Iraq, and from that I gleaned a lot of my information, and as well as reading and other typical research, more traditional research. And I also have been interviewing Iraqis lately. So I shall begin at the beginning to make it easy. I will say one thing, which is that the novel is told in 3 voices, and one voice I didn't mention earlier. One voice is that of Kate Brady, who's an American soldier who grew up in upstate New York in a rural little town called Kate. And the other is in the voice of an Iraqi woman, Naema Jassim, who is a medical student from Baghdad. And the third voice is where I get literary. And the third voice is in third person, and it's a sort of projection into the future. And that voice, it's almost like, I wouldn't say it's a conscience in the book, but it's a sort of flash forward through the book that allows the reader to know more about the characters and what's happening to them than the characters know at the time, or what will happen to them. But I'm not going to read anything except one line from that. I'm going to wait till everybody sits down there. Hi. You must be journalists. Journalists are always late. Are you? Yes. This is something we will beat out of you in the journalism school. By the end of the semester, you won't be late anymore, I promise.
We're doing the same thing in oral history.
You can't be late when you're a journalist. You'll miss the press conference. All right. Aren't you glad I'm not teaching this semester? I'm such a toughie. Okay. So the beginning line is, perhaps if she curls up very small, she won't hurt anyone ever again. Kate. It's the biggest frigging spider I've ever seen in my life. From one hairy leg to the other, the whole thing's as long as my forearm. So I make sure it's dead first. Nudge it with the butt of my rifle till it flips over, limp and sandy. Then I pick it up by a leg, haul it into the tent like a shopping bag, and nail it to the pole beside the head of my cot, right under my crucifix. That should keep Mac Truck quiet, at least for the time being. He's terrified of spiders, asshole. The whistling is loud outside the tent today, a creepy skin-prickling sound I can never get used to. The desert whistles all day and night out here. The hissing whistle of the wind cutting past your helmet, the moaning whistle of it winnowing through the razor wire. I stand under the hot canvas a moment just listening, and then it hits me again, that deep down ache that makes me want to curl up and cry. What the fuck are you doing, Brady? It's Will Rickman, this bony young specialist in my squad, with zitty skin and an Adam's apple twice the size of his brain. I wipe my hands on my pants. Nothing. Rickman steps closer and squints at my spider. Look at that thing. It's disgusting. It's fucking bleeding black ooze. Don't talk like that about Fuzzy. Rickman raises his eyebrows, but all he says is, let's go, they're waiting. I pick up my rifle and follow him, sunglasses over my eyes, scarf over my mouth. Ducking against the wind, the sand whipping my cheeks, I run to the Humvee and cram into the back behind the other guy in my team, DJ, and our squad leader, Staff Sergeant Cormick. We got better things to do than wait while you powder your nose, Brady, Cormick shouts to me over the wind, shoving the Humvee into gear with a grinding wrench. Don't keep us waiting again, got it? Got it, son. While we drive along the dirt road to the checkpoint, the guys shooting their usual bull, I gaze out the slit of a back window into the early morning light. Dirty grey sand stretches as far as I can see, blending so exactly with a dust-filled sky it obliterates the horizon. On either side of the road are rows of rectangular olive-drab tents, their roofs droopy and covered in dust. The ones on the left are for us. The ones on the right behind the loops of razor wire are for the prisoners. But other than that, there's nothing out there but an endless grey blur. And a tree. I like that tree, standing outside the wire all by itself in the middle of the desert. I call it Marvin. I spend so many hours staring at Marvin that I know every twist of his wiry little branches, every pinpoint of his needle leaves. I talk to him sometimes, compare notes on how we're doing. We rattle along for 20 minutes or so, while I sit in a daze, too tired to line up my thoughts in any kind of an order. We work 12 to 15-hour shifts, and even so I can never sleep. It's too damn hot, and I'm sharing a tent with 33 snoring, farting members of the male sex, not to mention the prisoners only a few meters away, chanting and screaming all night long. As we near the checkpoint, the deep-down ache starts up again. I hate this. Sure enough, there they are, 50 or so civilians waiting outside the wire, baggy clothes flapping in the wind. They've been coming every day for weeks now, arriving at dawn to stand in the sun for hours without moving, like shrubs. Most of them are women, mothers and sisters, wives and daughters looking for their men. Cormac pulls the Humvee up to the checkpoint and we climb out. Hitching my rifle strap over my shoulder, I head for the wire with my team, sand blowing up my nose and down my throat, making me cough. God, what I would give for a breath of clear air, one that isn't filled with dust and the stink of burning shit and diesel. Air like the air at home, clean, cool mountain air. Brady, Cormac yells after me, beckoning me back with a jerk of his head. When you get over there, tell the Hadjis we'll mail them a list soon. Then make 'em fuck off. Yes, Aunt. And Brady, get a move on this time. I'm not any slower than anybody else, but I do what he says. What list he's talking about, though, I have no idea. There isn't any list. And even if we did have one, how in Christ's name am I supposed to tell these people, we'll mail you a list of the prisoners, when we just bombed all their houses and mailboxes too, if they even have mailboxes in Iraq? When we drove through Basra on the way here, from Kuwait in March, right after shock and awe started the war, it was flattened. Nothing but smouldering rubble. People living in lean-tos made of cardboard and scrap. Garbage piled so high you couldn't see over it, making the worst goddamn stink I've ever smelled in my life. Corpses lying in the streets, smashed and gory, like those run-down deer on the highways at home, only with human faces. But Cormac always gives me the job of talking to these people. He's got the idea that the sight of a female soldier will win hearts and minds. We've just pulverized their towns, locked up their men and killed their kids, and one G.I. Jane with sand up her ass is supposed to make it okay? The minute I step in front of the checkpoint wire, the same old havoc begins. Civilians shouldering each other to get near me, waving photographs and screeching. A checkpoint is supposed to be secure, but ours is nothing but a plywood shack no bigger than a garden shed, a rickety wooden tower, a razor wire fence, and a handful of badly trained reservists. And sand, of course. Lots and lots of sand. Imagine being on an empty beach looking out at the ocean, I wrote to Tyler once. Now take away the ocean and replace it with sand all the way to the end of the frigging world. That's where I am. I miss Tyler so bad. The soapy smell of his hair, the warmth of his big body up against mine, and his eyes. He has the prettiest eyes you ever saw. Cinnamon eyes. Soon this old couple pushes through the crowd and hustles up to me, the woman clutching her husband's arm. They both look unbelievably ancient and withered. The woman is draped from head to toe in black, her cheeks lined with a million tiny cracks, her dark eyes watering under her wrinkly brow. The man is white-haired and knotty with a tiny brown face like a walnut. Holding each other tight, they hobble up close, and that's when they realize I'm a female. The usual snort of surprise, like I'm some clown the US military shipped out for their entertainment. Then they try to press the advantage. "Lady, look," the old man says in a garble that sounds vaguely like English, and his wife pushes a photo at me with a trembling hand. "My son, he here? Does he live?" I look at it, not because I'm interested, but because that's my job. A wide-eyed Arab with a Saddam moustache, same as a million others. I nod like I know him, and the old couple gets real excited. The woman even smiles, 5 teeth missing. Her whole wrinkly face is so full of hope that I have to turn away. We have 7,000 prisoners in this place, and more coming in every day. How the hell am I supposed to know anything from some crappy old snapshot? If he's here, I'm sure he's safe, I say. Thank you, lady soldier, the old man answers, his voice quavering. That makes me feel bad. Go home now, I tell him in the crowd. When we have a list of the detainees, we'll let you know, but you gotta go now. I wave my arms in a shooing motion. Nothing changes. The civilians just keep pressing around me, hollering and shoving their goddamn photos into my face. I shouldn't even be here by myself in the middle of a bunch of locals like this. One of them could shoot my head off any second. I glance over my shoulder. Where the hell is Zit-Face Rickman? He's supposed to be my battle buddy, out here with me, watching my back. But no, he's over behind the wire, nice and safe, chewing the fat with PFC Bonaparte, popularly known as Boner. I'm alone, as usual. Okay. Now Naema. It happened last night while we were squeezed around my grandmother's table eating supper. Only a week had passed since we had fled the war and our home in Baghdad to take shelter in Granny's village house near Qazar, so we were still shaken and disoriented and trying to work out how to make sense of our days. I want you two to keep up your studies while we're here, Papa was saying to me and my little brother, and no excuses. But I left all my books behind, so I can't study, Zaki replied, gripping the edge of the table while he teetered on the back legs of his chair. I'll help you protect the house instead, Papa. My father smiled, the lamplight glancing off his thick glasses, and reached out to tousle my brother's hair. Don't be silly, my boy. You'll study 5 hours a day. Then you can help me. And sit up before you break Granny's chair. Zaki ducked away from Papa's hand, but he obeyed. Musicians don't need school, he muttered, smoothing his hair carefully back into place over his brow. We are artists. I laughed. Poor Zaki, only 13, and he thinks he has the talent to be a rock star. I can hear little evidence of it when he thumps away at his guitar. All he has are dreams. But we indulge him anyhow, for what is a child without dreams? Naema will tutor you, Mama says firmly. She was bent over the table, her long back curved, serving her mother lentil soup. Granny Mariam is so old that most of her teeth are missing and her hands shake, so she has difficulty eating without spilling. She can keep you up on your English and science, Mama continued. I am the English speaker in the family, my big talent. Although Papa too can speak it quite well, we used to practice together by listening to the BBC. But Naema's a rotten teacher. She's always blowing up at me. Don't talk that way about your sister, Granny Colt scolded her in a creaky voice. We must all... Furious voices outside, a pounding at the door, so violent it seemed about to knock down the house. What's that? Granny said, her eyes wide with fear. Soldiers, I whispered. Americans. All of you, in the back room now, Papa ordered. Open up, the soldiers bellowed, kicking the door so hard it strained on its hinges. Before anyone could stop me, I ran and unbolted it. If I speak English to these Americans, I thought in my innocence, they will not hurt us. Naema, get back, Papa shouted. If only he had not. Perhaps then we would have remained calm and these terrible things would never have happened. But who can know? No, I cannot blame Papa. The soldiers tore in, first one, then another, then a third, hideous in their bulky uniforms, their faces obscured by goggles and helmets, their huge guns thrusting, voices roaring fury and insults. They pushed me aside as if I were nothing but air and rushed at my father. With a blow to his head, they knocked him to the ground. Papa! Zaki shrieked. We all know how frail Papa is, how his legs were broken again and again by Saddam's torturers, how his heart almost burst with the pain. One of the soldiers turned on Zaki then, little Zaki, not even tall enough to reach my chin, and thin as a reed, and kicked him in the stomach. He doubled over with a cry. They threw him face down on the ground next to Papa. "Stop, please," I begged in English. "He is only a child." But they did not hear me. I had no voice to them, no existence. My mother clutched Granny, who was wailing, all her memories of Saddam's brutes flooding back, I am sure, those men who had stormed into her house just like this and dragged her husband to his death. 2 soldiers stamped their filthy boots down on the necks of Papa and Zaki, pushing their poor faces into the floor. Then they bound their hands behind their backs and pulled those horrible pointed hoods over their heads. I could hear Papa choking and Zaki whimpering in terror. "Stop!" I cried again. "This is a child. His father is sick. They will suffocate. Please!" "Shut up!" a soldier barked at me, and he pushed me so hard into Mama and Granny we fell against the wall. All I could see of his face was a twisted grimace of hatred and fear. They pulled Papa and Zaki to their feet by their bound wrists, as if they were sacks of grain, not human beings, and jabbed their guns into their backs, pushing and kicking them out of the door. I ran after them just in time to see 2 soldiers pick them up and throw them into the back of a truck, surely breaking their bones or tearing their flesh. I heard Zaki cry out in pain, but my father was silent. "Don't hurt them," I pleaded. "Please don't hurt them." "Why have they done this?" Mama cried, clutching her head as they drove away. "Why?" And that is when I felt the anger grow over me like a skin. That is when I became merciless and numb. So this morning, as I walked the 4 kilometers from Granny's village to the American prison, I am determined to do whatever it takes to find out what has happened to our men, both my own and those of my companions. Little Abu Raya and his wife, who have already lost 2 children to the Iran war, they were forced to watch their remaining boy, and only comfort being beaten and snatched in the night, just like Papa and Zaki. And Granny's friend, old widow Fatima, who has been making this walk every day for 3 weeks already, her brother and sole support, is also incarcerated there. "Do they tell you anything at the prison?" I asked this widow on the way. "Is your brother all right?" "I do not know, little daughter," she replies, shaking her old head. "They tell us nothing. All we can do is wait." When we reach the prison at last, and the walk is long and frightening, with soldiers roaring down the road in their tanks and trucks, we see that many other families are already there, standing in a crowd beside the coils of wire that block the prison entrance. So we go to stand with them, burning under the sun and buffeted by the wind, ready to endure the same weight as any who have been beaten into passivity by war and history. We stand, my sad companions and I, until the sun has crept from the horizon almost to the top of the sky, and finally I see a tiny soldier plod up to the fence where we are waiting. He looks as though he can hardly walk under all he carries, with his helmet like an upside-down soup bowl, and his sunglasses absurdly large on his little face. He looks like a child in his father's clothes. But of course he is no child. He is a killer and an occupier. I watch him approach, shouting and waving his silly little arms, and I feel such hatred bloom in my heart I do not know myself. Then I notice there is something odd about him, something wrong. I look again. It is a girl. I would laugh out loud if there were any laughter left in me. How desperate the Americans must be to send their girls to war. As soon as the people around me also see this soldier is only a girl, and out here all alone with us, they grow bold. "You have killed our sons," they shout, closing in around her. "You're lying to us, bitch!" I step forward to curse her too, but then I stop. This behavior is futile. Better to wait for the chance to offer my English to this creature of destruction, for perhaps, God willing, in return, she will tell us what she and her kind have done with our men. A little bit more of Kate. I'm getting freaked. No matter how much I yell and try to shoo away the wrinkly old couple and the rest of these damn locals, they won't budge. They just keep on crowding around me, yelling in Arabic and pushing their fucking photos into my chest. I'm just about to poke one of them with my rifle, hard, when a female voice calls out from the crowd, "I speak English. Do you need help?" Startled, I look around. An Iraqi girl about my own age separates herself from the mob, walks right up to me and stares into my face with no fear at all. "You really speak English?" I ask, amazed. She studies me without answering. She's wearing a long coffee-coloured sack of a dress and a sky-blue headscarf wrapped tight around her neck and forehead. Her face is narrow, pale brown and pretty, except for her mouth, which is clamped into a thin schoolmarmy line, and her eyes, which are huge and greenish gold, look suspicious as hell. "Yes," she finally says in a low voice. "I am able to translate if you would like." "You would? Cool. Okay then. Tell your friends here that we're putting together a list of the prisoners and we'll give it to them soon, but right now they gotta go." "I will. But first, please, I need to ask a question. We want to know, these people and I, when our men will be released." "I don't know," I say, eyeing her warily. "But tell them not to worry. We treat the prisoners well. Now get them to leave." The girl studies me again. She's half a head taller than me, but that's not saying much since I'm only 5'3". "This is the truth, you swear?" she says. "Because my father and brother, you have locked them up in here, and they are innocent." "Yeah, right. So is everybody in this whole frigging sandbox, according to you people." But out loud I only say, "Of course it's true. Now tell these folks about the list and make them go, because this situation is getting dangerous for all of us, you included." She gazes at me a second longer, then turns to the crowd and calls out something in Arabic. But instead of making the people leave, it only makes them more excited than ever, talking and shouting all at once. Fuck. I look around again for my squad. Sergeant Cormac and Boner are inside the shack where they can't see anything. Rickman's over there too, standing in the sand like a cactus, probably dreaming about his first grope or something, he's such a kid. Jimmy Donald's up in the guard tower with his M60, and DJ's out on the road searching cars. Nobody's near me. Nobody's paying attention, which is against all the goddamn rules. Double fuck. The girl turns back to me. "They say they will go, but not until they know when you have this list of our men." "Soon, now tell them to scat." I lift my rifle to my chest, barrel up. She sweeps her eyes over my face, her expression cold. "And what are you doing with the children? The little boys you arrested? My brother you took, he is only 13. "We keep the boys safe in a separate compound. Now leave." "You mean he is not with my father?" She looks upset a moment, her cold manner gone. But then she clamps her mouth back into its schoolmarm seam. "My brother, his name is Zaki," she goes on. "Look!" And she hands me a photo just like the old couple did. The last thing I need to do right now is admire some Iraqi chick's family snapshots, but I do it to keep her cooperating. The photo shows a skinny boy sitting on a rug, grinning up at the camera with just the kind of goofy expression my friends use on MySpace. His black hair flops into his eyes, which are the same green gold as his sister's, and he's got one of those long bony faces that'll probably look good once he grows into it, but right now seems all wrong, like the head of a grown-up stuck onto a kid's body. Next to him, leaning forward in a chair with his hand on the boy's shoulder, is a clean-shaven middle-aged man with short grey hair, thick glasses, and the same long face, but a real sad smile. It's always so strange to look at photos of people before bad things happen to them, when they don't know yet, when they're so unsuspecting. "That is my father," the girl says. "He is 54, his heart is weak, he has had 2 heart attacks already. This is why I am so worried about him. He is not well enough to live in this place with hundreds of other men. He has not the strength. My father was put in prison by Saddam, tortured by him. My brother, he is a child, and you Americans arrest them? You understand nothing." I don't need to hear this crap. Shouldn't even be listening to it, but I might as well be polite. "Listen," I say, "I'm sorry about your situation, but we've got thousands of prisoners in here. Thanks for your help, though, really." I hold out my hand. "My name's Kate Brady. Assalamu alaikum. 3 months in Iraq have at least taught me how to say that, kind of." She glances down at my hand without touching it. "I am Naema Jassim. Keep the photograph. It will help you recognize them. She pauses and looks at me intently like she's trying to see into my brain. Miss Brady, Kate, I have a suggestion. If you would promise to look for my brother and father, I will come back every morning and translate for you, yes? These people here, they are angry. You need me to help keep control, I think. She leans forward and points at the photograph. My father here, his name is Halim Mohammad Al-Jubar. And my little brother sitting there on the floor, he is Zaki Jassim. You will look for them, please. I'll never remember those weird Arab names. In one ear, out the other. Tell me that again? I will write them down if you like. Okay, but hurry. I take out a pen from my utility vest and she scribbles the names on the back of the photo. You will look for them if I translate? She asks again. Yeah, sure, I'll do my best. I tuck the photo and pen into one of my pockets. I'm not about to tell her that I never see the prisoners, except when they're driven in on the backs of trucks, and then they're all zip-cuffed and hooded anyway. So all I ever see is bodies with a sack on top. I'm not going to tell her this because she's right. I do need her. Just then some woman squeezes between us and shoves a baby into my chest. It's limp and grey and skinny as a chicken. I think it's a girl, but I can't really tell. Pus-filled sores ooze all over its face and arms. I back away disgusted, but she won't stop pressing the horrible thing right up against me. These people never do stuff like this to the male soldiers. I'm afraid it'll fall if I don't take it, though, so I grab it and hold it as far away from me as I can. It stinks. A sickly sweet stink, like a dead rat trapped in the basement. I glance down at it. The baby isn't even moving. It just lies there in its little dress, draped over my arms like a rag, while its mother stares at me with desperate eyes. I know what she wants. She wants a doctor and medicine. She wants me to take her baby to a hospital, but we don't have a doctor. We don't have medicine, and we sure as hell don't have a fucking hospital. I push the baby back into her arms and try to make her understand that I can't do anything for her. Go home, I keep telling her. Go! She won't move. I look around for Naema, hoping she can help me out here like she promised. But Naema's gone. Okay, so that's all I'll read. Thank you. It's hard on the voice. So I guess I'll just tell you a little bit of how I got the idea and how I did some of the material I got from the interviews, and then I'd really like to just take questions. I interviewed a young soldier who had the same job as Kate. She was guarding Camp Buka, and at first she was at checkpoint just like Kate is in this scene, and later she moved to actually guarding one of the prison compounds, where she was put up on a tower, and she spent 14 hours alone up there in the sun, with the Iraqis about 10 yards away from her, and that's what she did for months. But she told me about the Iraqi civilians coming to look for her, for their family members who'd been arrested, all men at that point, and how some of them spoke English, and she would sometimes have an exchange with them. And then the same soldier told me that she was being harassed constantly in her tent by the men on her own side, who she was sharing a tent with, just like Kate, 33 men. And when she was standing up on that tower, the Iraqi prisoners, who were furious at being arrested and saw that she was a girl, would expose themselves to her, masturbate in front of her, throw their own excrement at her, and scorpions and snakes and stones and whatever else. So all day long she had that, and all night long she had harassment from her fellow soldiers. So after a few months of this relentless treatment, she began to go pretty crazy. She got unbelievably angry, not surprisingly. And there was one Iraqi prisoner in particular who was constantly masturbating in front of her and jeering at her. And she just couldn't ignore him, and no matter how she reacted, he just got worse. So she told the soldiers in her who worked inside the compound, if he ever gives you any trouble, if you have any reason to hurt him, I want to be there. And one day he flipped out and he began throwing himself against the razor wire, which is all they had then. It was just tents in the desert, like I described. There were no buildings. And tearing himself up. So she got called and she went down there and she stamped on his head and ground his face into the sand, and she said, and I told him who I was because I wanted him to know a girl was doing this to him and that I was worth more than the shit he was treating me as, something like that. So she had these two separate stories, and I got the idea that I would make this happen in the novel, but that the man she beat up would have a significance beyond just being, I'm not going to tell you what, but beyond, he would have a significance beyond just being one of the prisoners, and that this would have a lasting effect on her, as I think it would anyone. So my idea, like for the basic plot idea for this novel came straight out of the research I did and the interviews. And just for those of you who are new to the room, I spent nearly 3 years interviewing some 40 women soldiers who'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and some of them in particular over many months for many, many, many hours, which is why they began to trust me with these stories. On the Iraqi side, I met this young woman here through a student of mine at the journalism school who had been working as an interpreter for an American journalist. But let me go back to her story, because her story is amazing. I didn't tell you all this before. When she was 16 in school, she wrote a poem about the Iran-Iraq War, in which she described the death of a soldier as a tragedy. Well, under Saddam, anybody who died for Iraq had to be talked about as a martyr, as a noble martyr. You couldn't talk about the deaths of anyone as a tragedy. That was unpatriotic. She got arrested, age 16, put in Abu Ghraib for 2 years, where she was repeatedly raped and tortured. She survived that. She came out. She came from a religious Shia family, which is not necessarily true of all Iraqis, and I'll go back to that in a minute. Her brothers said, we want you to have a virginity test. And if you're not a virgin, we're going to kill you because you brought dishonor on our family. Her mother said, over my dead body. So it divided the family. The mother protected her from being ever going to a doctor to be checked, and she survived. Then our war started, and she had by then learned English, and she got work with a freelance journalist called Stephen Vincent as an interpreter. And they were kidnapped by a militia and beaten up and shot. And he was killed, and she was shot in the back and the leg and left for dead, and rescued by American soldiers who took her to a hospital. And the Stephen Vincent's widow worked very hard for 2 years to get her over here and keep her safe, because at this point she was in constant danger of being killed for having worked with an American. So she had to flee to Damascus and spend 2 years in Damascus until the visa came through. This is a woman who's only 35 years old now, and she's so brave and so amazing. You would never know that she's been through such horrors. But she can't find a job. I've tried to get her a job here. I've tried to get her a job on the New York Times. She can translate. She's fluent in English. She said she'll do anything except work with dogs, and I think it's because dogs were probably used to terrorize her in the prison. I can't find her a job. And Iraqi refugees are having a terrible time finding work, like all of us, but it's worse. The prejudice against them is enormous here. Anyway, she agreed to meet me a few times and tell me about life in Iraq and life in the war, and she agreed to read the Naema sections for me. I tried to pay her for it. She wouldn't take a penny. She said, "No, you're an artist. I believe in art and artists. It's an honor to work with you." It's very touching. And she helped me shape Naema's story more and get some things right, and told me to make Naema angrier, as I was mentioning earlier, than I had her originally. So we're still in touch, but she's had an awfully hard time. And then afterwards I found some other Iraqi refugees who live upstate, and they gave me more information too that I was able to use for Naema. But mostly it's a work of imagination that's just fed by all the interviews I did. And so it's hard for me to tease out, you know, what came from real life and what I made up, because it's all blended in now. But so now I just would like to take your questions about the interviewing or the writing or whatever you're interested in, or life for Iraqis or anything. Yes.
The American women you interviewed, did any of them express any hope that that culture of persecution, if you will, against them in the military could ever be changed?
Well, some did and some didn't. Some said to me, it'll never change because the military culture is a rape culture. So I'm quoting one of them. And the misogyny in the military is so deep-seated, and it is so reinforced by all the language and the way the male soldiers relate to each other, that it'll never change. Others have worked to make it change. They've formed organizations. They've testified to Congress. Right now there is a class action suit against the Pentagon, which was partly slightly inspired by The Lonely Soldier.
Well, largely inspired.
And it's on behalf of 17 women and 2 men who were sexually assaulted and persecuted in the military, and now I think 20 more have added their names. And the class action suit is against the Pentagon and Defense Secretaries Rumsfeld and Gates. And basically it's saying you not only failed to protect us, but you failed to follow up with any kind of justice afterwards when we tried to report the crime. So there is action, and it's gotten some results, and those are the people who believe there can be change, who've become activists.
Well, I know the Air Force had a big investigation several years ago. And I don't know if things have changed within the Air Force at all.
No. The academy, the military academies are so rife with sexual assault, and it's ghastly. That's me, how awful. I always tell my students I'll throw their cell phones out the window if they do this, and now I'm doing it.
We can't open these windows, so you're safe.
But no, the academies are really terrible. I mean, it's, if you imagine a fraternity and where everybody's been trained to kill, and you put 2 women in the middle of it. Yeah.
Which of the 2 books do you think captures the war better?
The novel, and that leads me to talk a bit more about what fiction can do, the non-fiction can do. Even though I listened to these women and they opened their minds and hearts to me so much, I did feel there were places, I had to say this, I have to repeat myself here, but there were things they wouldn't say or couldn't say, or it was too traumatizing for them. Or they didn't even know how to say it, and sometimes they didn't even know what they really knew yet. They were still fresh from the war. They only knew that they were shaking all the time, or having flashbacks, or couldn't hold a job, or couldn't hold down a relationship, or were drinking too much, but they knew that it was something called PTSD, but they couldn't even always say exactly what caused it. Some of them had been through something horrible and obvious, like they'd been raped or they'd been in a mortar attack or they'd killed someone. Some of them it was subtler than that. And I felt that I wanted to go into the secret experience of war, the interior, day-to-day, moment-to-moment feeling. Like when I have Kate say, I really hate this. The dread you feel when you have to face an ordeal. Most soldiers wouldn't really talk about that kind of an intimate feeling, and so I wanted to go to fiction to be able to get that deep into people. And also the beauty of fiction is that the characters are not real people, so you can't hurt them, you can't exploit them, you can't make them feel exploited, you can't embarrass them, you can't do them any harm, which even if you're a very ethical journalist and trying really hard not to, sometimes you do, especially when you're writing about people's intimate stories and about trauma. So to be able to describe trauma without actually having to lay out any real person bare to the world was very appealing to me.
Great point.
And it also gave me a freedom to go really in there without thinking about somebody betraying anyone or hurting anyone, and just fully imagining it, you know, when she's attacked, what it would really feel like there. I mean, Kate, there's mortar attacks, there are IEDs, there's attack from her sergeant. I can describe what that's like in more detail than any of the soldiers did to me, because I can imagine it. When you listen to 40 people talk about those things for 3 years and you bring your imagination as a fiction writer, I think you can go deeper. And I think that's the business of fiction, is to talk about the interior world of people, the world that is hidden not only to other people but sometimes to ourselves. So that's why I had to do this. Yes.
So you said also that in your mind, when you look back at the work now, the line between fact and fiction has almost become slightly blurred. And I was just wondering how you think that might affect any potential future reporting you could do in the country.
Well, this is my 6th novel. So I've always gone back and forth between non-fiction and fiction. And nobody's ever said to me, we don't trust you, you'll make it up. I called it a novel. Now, if I had pretended it wasn't a novel and made it up, I should be, thrown into journalist jail. but if such a thing existed, it's not an issue. Where I took that risk a bit more is with The Lonely Soldier, because it's a piece of literary journalism. In other words, I used narrative and I recreate scenes, and as if I were there, had been there, or not as if I were there, as if I'd witnessed them. I don't put myself in it, but and that meant taking some liberties. I'll tell you one story which is probably really shocking for journalism students. Maybe I shouldn't even say it.
Go right ahead.
But this same woman whose story inspired Sand Queen described, she entered Iraq right after the shock and awe, right after the bombing. She entered on a convoy from Kuwait, and she drove through, as I described, flattened towns, bombed people, charred bodies. And she was not able to describe that in any kind of detail to me. But I found 2 memoirs by Marines, one by a journalist, an embedded journalist, and one by a Marine captain who'd driven that same route the day before her. And they described it in a lot of detail. So I went to her and said, I've recreated this scene of you driving into Iraq, and I'd like you to check and make sure it's okay. And she said, I can't. I just can't look at it. I can't remember it. I can't breathe. When I think of those days, I can't breathe. And she shook all the time, by the way. She's 23 years old, and she shook as if she had Parkinson's from the shock of the war. She said, make it up. It'll be right. It'll be right. So I lifted descriptions from other people and then I recreated that scene of driving into Iraq. And finally later, she agreed to read it, but she kind of read it like this. Yeah, that's fine. And it was so painful for her. That's the closest thing. That's the closest I got to fudging a little bit, but I, you know, I checked it against other people's accounts, and luckily I had more than one. And then I talked to her sergeant, and he was more able to describe it, but it was backwards compared to the way you usually do it in journalism. You know, I made it up first, and then I checked it to make sure I'd made it up right. And I've never done that in any of my other work before, and it really is only in that one scene in this book. But with fiction, I do it the other way around. I make things up, and then I fact check them afterwards to see if they're plausible. Because with fiction, if you're too close to the facts, it just sounds like bad journalism, you know, or thinly disguised journalism. It hampers your imagination. You have to be free to invent, and then you can check stuff later. So it's really an opposite process in many ways to writing non-fiction. But I also, I mean, this is different with Sand Queen than my usual process, because of course, as I said, I'd done all those interviews before, and I had the accounts and the voices and the stories echoing in my head all the time as I was writing. Oh, hello everyone.
What a good thought.
Yeah, it was dark. So in a way, their voices thread throughout. That story about the stinky baby was completely real. That was told to me by a soldier. The oozing sores and the grey baby, and they didn't have a hospital or any doctors at that time at Camp Buka. I also checked that out. That was true. So all the little details like that in the novel are from the journalistic research. You know, when you're writing about a real place and events in recent history, you can't make up too much stuff. I feel you have the same obligation to be accurate as you would as if it were non-fiction, even though the story and the characters are invented. Does that make sense?
Yes. Absolutely.
Any other questions? Yes.
There's been lots of journalism written about the 10 years now of perpetual war that we've been entered in this past decade, but very little fiction. Why do you think that is?
It's a good question, and I've wondered that myself. I think it's partly that fiction writers haven't had much access to Iraq. It's partly that the genre of the soldier memoir has become quite popular, and I think the publishing industry has been more interested in memoirs than fiction for quite a while now, and memoirs from soldiers who've actually been in the war are kind of, you know, sexy. Iraqis are not writing about it in English yet. They might be elsewhere, I don't know. I have found one or two not very well-known novels written by Iraqi exiles, but they're all by people who didn't actually live through the war. They're people who left Iraq before the war and have been freer to publish and express themselves. So they're not really mostly writing about this war. Some people say it's too soon, but it's been 10 years and I don't think it is too soon. I don't really know why there hasn't been more. But there is some out there. It's just not getting a lot of attention, and I think it is, you know, this country is in love with non-fiction and suspicious of novels, alas, now. Used to be a day when novels were the places you went to learn about the human condition. Now you go to self-help books or something horrible like that, and non-fiction, but you don't learn about people's souls in non-fiction. You can learn history, you can learn facts, but I think it's really hard to get deep inside with it. But there's a suspicion in this sort of information highway we're stuck on. There's a suspicion of fiction, and it's commonly seen as something that's fluffy or, you know, not serious or not real. And the idea that actually fiction can get closer to truth than non-fiction in all kinds of profound ways is really old-fashioned. But I'm still waving the flag for it. Yeah. Yes.
how do you see the difference? Because I know you were stressing before the fact of coming back to traumatize the person, and then you gave the example right now of showing the facts and like reproving. Where do you see the line between those two kind of elements of making sure they're factual, but at the same time not coming to it?
You mean not going to the source and making them upset? Well, that was hard. I mean, luckily I had a long time, because writing a book, you know, it takes a few years. So my sources, the soldiers would go in and out of being too upset to talk to me and back into being okay talking to me. For some of them, though, the very sound of my voice became a trigger for PTSD episodes where they'd have flashbacks or nightmares or shaking, because I became associated with the story, because I was the first person they told the story to. So I had to back way off from those people because I became bad for them, which is really hard. One of you asked me earlier if my sources from this book had read this book. One of the reasons I don't know is because I've backed off from so many of them. I think I need to leave them alone. And I'm not sure that they want to read this book. You know, I think it would be really upsetting, so I don't even want to push this book on them. Let other people read it, you know. But I do want Iraqis to read it, although it'll be upsetting for them too. But I think there's a hunger among Iraqis, English-speaking Iraqis, to be represented. And I want to say a bit more about that. I got a review today in the newspaper. It was a great review, it was in the Times Herald, but it described Naema as a tribeswoman. And this is after reading my book. And I was I was hoping people would understand that, you know, that Iraqis are not primitive people. I was so shocked when I read that word. But I don't know how many of you know what life was like for Iraqi women. If you lived in Baghdad and you weren't being persecuted by Saddam, you had more freedom than any Muslim women anywhere in the world outside of Turkey. You know, Saddam had a secular government. So 40% of the workforce were women, 50% of the students were women. Women were doctors and engineers and lawyers and professors and politicians. They didn't have to wear the veil. Most of the Iraqis I know are like this. So even though I told you the story of Noor, who helped me with this, who was threatened with death by her brothers, I've met many Iraqis who have completely equal relationships with their spouses and are just as highly educated as the men they know. And they consider their country utterly destroyed by our war. And they say to me that Saddam was weakening already and he would have fallen and we might have had our own Arab Spring and we did not need to destroy the country and tear it apart. And sometimes interviewing these Iraqis, there was one family I went to see. They were both, the mother and father were both engineers, which is the top profession. It's the most prestigious profession in Iraq. And their 15-year-old son had been killed and her brother had been killed. The man worked as an interpreter for Americans, so they finally got over here after 2 years in Jordan with their daughter and their little son. They spent 10 months looking for work. He finally got work working in a window shade factory. She got work as a seamstress in a mattress factory. And now he's finally found a job, but he has to commute 2 states away to it, and she's a substitute teacher and is jeered at constantly by the children in the school in Albany. And her daughter got a scholarship into pharmacy school, age 22, and couldn't make friends for 2 years. This is an outgoing, pretty, very Western-looking, probably if she walked by you would think she was Latina, but the prejudice against Arabs is so deep that even her own peers wouldn't talk to her for 2 years. So they tell me their story, and I felt that it was really important to make it clear to them how I felt about the war, because they're dealing with all this prejudice up there, and all this sort of Iraqi hating people around them. So I had to say, I just want you to know that I've been against this war from the beginning. I thought it was a terrible, terrible, tragic mistake. And the mother calls over the little boy, 9 years old, Mustafa, and she sits him on her lap and says, Mustafa, I want you to listen to this American lady explain to you why she thinks the war was wrong. So I had to apologize on behalf of America to this 9-year-old Iraqi boy whose brother had been killed. Oh, it was really something. But then he asked me if I wrote Harry Potter.
And what did you say?
Because of being English. I said, no, that was another English woman. No, it was very sweet.
She has had her.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the interviewing techniques for the first book that served you well, and those that failed you at the times when you needed them, given what your audience was facing?
Yes. At the beginning, it was a little rough because I knew so little about the military. And I mean, as journalists, we're used to starting off interviews knowing little, because we don't have time to do all the studying up that oral historians do before interviews. We're usually, just interviewing, and we're being thrust into worlds we don't know, sometimes with no warning at all. I mean, I read up some, but it was really hard to keep all the ranks, for example, in my head, and what an E4 was and what an E6 was. So I asked, very